ASUS's ZenFone 6 was one of my biggest surprises of 2019, with a unique flip camera design and notch-free display. ASUS is one of the few companies doing something different, and its successor, the ZenFone 7 Pro, is just as different, but this year the execution of everything that makes it unique is so much better. Stick around and subscribe to Android Central for more reviews like this one, and we'll dive into what makes the ZenFone 7 Pro one of my favourites of 2020 so far. Before we get stuck into the nitty-gritty hardware details, let's catch up on the central premise of the ZenFone 7 Pro, that flip camera. You've got 3 cameras on the back and 0 on the front. That's because when you need a front-facing camera, the 3 main cameras simply flip around to point at your face. There's no need for an unsightly notch or cutout to fit in extra selfie cameras, and you're getting better quality selfies anyway because you're using the same high-quality cameras that you use for regular rear-facing photography. This year, ASUS has made some pretty huge upgrades to its cameras. There's a 3x telephoto now, notably missing from the ZenFone 6 with optical stabilization. OIS has also been added to the main camera, which now uses Sony's beefy new 64MP IMX686 sensor, and ultra-wide gets an upgrade to the 12MP IMX363, aka the main sensor from the Google Pixel 4. However, there's no OIS in that ultra-wide. Add to that improved image processing, and it's pretty clear the camera experience of the ZenFone 7 Pro is a major leap from last year, even challenging the likes of the OnePlus 8 Pro. The new larger sensor performs excellently across the board, whether in low light using ASUS's night mode, or in high contrast situations with a lot of backlighting. This is every bit a flagship tier main camera, extremely capable, with that 64MP sensor taking 16MP images by default with the equivalent pixel size of 1.6 microns. That means compared to something like the OnePlus 8 Pro or Galaxy S20, you're trading a little extra low light performance for a little extra resolution. So not a huge difference either way, and the sensor's also large enough that in close-ups you get a nice bit of natural bokeh. Having a sensor like this, backed up by flagship level processing, is a revelation for front-facing photography. Low light performance is the obvious benefit of taking selfies with your main sensor. After all, things like optical stabilization are still rare in selfie cameras. But also consider things like autofocus. Now there's no need to worry about awkward fixed focus selfie cameras that make you look just a tiny bit out of focus if you're in the wrong place. The ZenFone 7 Pro has probably the best and certainly the most versatile selfie setup of any smartphone camera. The ultra-wide in particular is fantastic, not just at giving you more space for scenery and friends, but doing so without compromising image quality, and once again giving you those rear-facing camera luxuries like autofocus. See, that's the trade-off of a lot of phones that give you a secondary wide-angle selfie camera on the front, like the OnePlus Nord. You get that wider angle, but the quality just isn't great. Totally different story with the ZenFone because you're using what's normally a rear-facing wide-angle camera. The ultra-wide also performs well across the board with minimal distortion around the edges of the frame and a 113-degree field of view that's great at capturing a wider view of what's in front of you. The lack of OIS means low light performance is weaker than the regular camera, but the relatively large 1.4 micron pixels and ASUS's software processing go a long way towards compensating for this. I wasn't really expecting too much out of the 8MP 3x telephoto, but I came away pleasantly surprised. Obviously it's not as crazy good as long shots that you get from a periscope telephoto camera, but it is shockingly good even at digital zoom. You can still make out plenty of fine detail in these wine bottles shot at around 6 to 7 times. And by the way, yes, you can also use the telephoto camera in selfies too, but I'm not really sure why you'd want to, unless you really want to fill the frame with nothing but your face. But the flip camera isn't just useful for front-facing or rear-facing shots. You can stop rotating at any angle in between the two, and even save 3 preset positions within the camera app for quick access. So if you want to quickly switch to a 90-degree angle to frame up a shot of a pet without spooking them, that's really easy to do, and actually super useful if you want a low perspective of a scene without getting right down on your hands and knees. And because of ASUS's floating camera control panel feature, you can also use this in third-party camera apps. So the basic look and feel of the ZenFone 7 Pro isn't dramatically changed compared to either the ZenFone 6 or its close cousin the ROG Phone 3. It's still a pretty chunky phone, and the painted metal sidewalls and chamfers give it a bit of a retro feel, but at least the glass itself has a more ostentatious look this time around with an iridescent turquoise effect as it's tilted to the light. While the ZenFone 7 Pro is easier to manhandle than the extra chunky ROG Phone 3, this is most certainly not a svelte handset. With its 6.67-inch display and generous proportions, it certainly looks and feels like a big phone. That space and weight is put to good use though. ASUS has maintained the same generous 5000 mAh battery capacity from last year's model, while boosting charging speeds up to 30 watts via Quick Charge 4 or USB PD. There's still no wireless charging though, unfortunately. Fresh out of the box, I've been pretty impressed with the ZenFone's battery life, though with one major asterisk that I'll get to in a second. So on the pre-release firmware that I've been using, I've been pretty easily getting through a full day with around 6 hours of screen on time if I push the phone hard. Most days though, I'd have between 50 and 25% left in the tank by bedtime, and the only way I was able to kill it off in less than a day was with constant photo, video and LTE data usage. But just a quick word of warning, around 24 hours before this review is due to go live, ASUS dropped a software update designed to address a bug with battery standby, so obviously that hasn't given us much time with the new firmware. For what it's worth, my standby battery time has been perfectly fine even on the old firmware, but nevertheless we'll toss a note and a link in the description if there aren't any big changes on the new firmware. With that said, let's move on to a couple of significant hardware compromises. First, no 3.5mm headphone jack, not exactly uncommon, but that is a change from the ZenFone 6. And because of the unique flip camera, the ZenFone 7 Pro isn't water resistant and has no IP rating. There's also no gasket around the SIM tray, so you want to be extra careful around sinks, pools, or any other sources of water you might come across. That's not to say the ZenFone 7 Pro is fragile though. Its flip camera has a new and redesigned motor which, in addition to being smoother, is rated up to 200,000 rotations, or more than 100 flips per day for 5.5 years. That's double 100,000 rotation figure of the ZenFone 6. In most other respects, the ZenFone 7 Pro checks all the major boxes for a 2020 flagship. The display thankfully has been upgraded beyond the lackluster LCD of last year's ZenFone, and now features a far superior 90Hz AMOLED panel, though still at Full HD Plus resolution. It's a flat display and packs a slightly larger chin than many competitors, but the vast uninterrupted screen space is definitely welcome. There's no notch or hole punch to be found here. The 90Hz refresh rate is lower than the 120Hz of the OnePlus 8 Pro and some others, but the difference in smoothness between 90 and 120 is barely noticeable, and the benefits when combined with the ZenFone's huge battery are worthwhile. The phone still manages a 200Hz touch response rate, and so feels just as slick and responsive as the OnePlus 8 Pro to my eyes and thumbs. On the inside, Qualcomm's very latest Snapdragon 865 Plus chipset powers the ZenFone 7 Pro, paired with an ample 8GB of RAM and 256GB of storage. MicroSD expansion is supported too, thankfully, and thanks to the triple slot SIM tray, it's possible to use an SD card and 2 SIMs at the same time. There's no in-screen or rear-facing fingerprint in the new ZenFone, instead the capacitive fingerprint scanner is now built into the power button on the side of the device. That was a bit of a concern for me at first, but I found it works far more reliably than, for example, Sony's lackluster side-mounted sensor on the Xperia 1 Mark II. Plus, that power key itself can now be programmed to launch apps or perform other functions with a long press or a double tap. I've got them set up to launch Google Pay and the camera app, but they are completely customizable. That's one of the many tweaks included with ASUS's Zen UI software. Zen UI went through a major overhaul last year, pivoting hard towards stock Android and away from the general goofiness of previous versions. That stock look and feel hasn't gone anywhere, but ASUS has added more helpful tweaks to its loadout in the latest release, like making the quick settings easier to use with one hand, and adding more functionality to the volume menu. All the battery health features that we first saw on the ROG Phone 3 are present too, including the ability to schedule slower charging times overnight to improve long-term battery health. Better charging habits can help dramatically improve your battery's longevity over time, so it's great to see software features designed to nudge us in the right direction. Meanwhile, the move to an AMOLED display has enabled the new always-on display feature, and this functions pretty much the same as it does on a Google Pixel phone, with a handful of clock designs and notifications able to pop up and partially wake the screen. Google's Android Messages app is bundled as the default text messenger, and the ZenFone also supports the Google Phone app if downloaded from Google Play, useful if you want Google's caller ID and spam detection features. So anyone put off by the design direction of, the next OnePlus Oxygen OS release? Should appreciate that ASUS's software is pretty much as clean as a Pixel these days. It really is a delight to use. The only caveat on the software side is that this phone has the misfortune of launching on Android 10 just days before the expected Android 11 stable release. Overall, the ASUS ZenFone 7 Pro is a substantial upgrade to the ZenFone 6. The core concept hasn't changed dramatically, and some necessary hardware compromises remain, but the execution of the ideas that made the ZenFone 6 unique has been much improved. The upgrades are in many areas incremental, but targeted at the areas that make the most sense, particularly the cameras, which make for one of the most versatile smartphone photography setups, especially when it comes to selfies. And other improvements like the 90Hz display, 5G connectivity, and faster charging make the ZenFone 7 Pro even more competitive in the very crowded Android flagship space. And with a Western price point that's breathing right down OnePlus's neck, the ZenFone 7 Pro is 100% worth your consideration and your cash, especially if you value battery life and the best selfie taking experience around. That's it for now. Be sure to subscribe to Android Central here on YouTube so you don't miss our Android 11 review coming soon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.